Good evening, Dr. Lisle. How are you doing today?
Good. How about yourself? All going well?
Doing great. Doing great.
All right.
And I'm looking forward to our topic today. It is the keys to
Sure.
a successful first date for men. Now, for our
All
women
right.
listeners, don't be worried. Next week, we're actually going to be talking about how to have a successful first date as a woman. So this week, we're going to focus just on the men's section. And just before we begin, whenever we're talking about first dates here, we're talking about you've already the girl has decided that you qualify for a first date, and we're going to assume here, Dr. Lisle, that the date is for pair bond strategy rather than casual mating strategy.
Very good.
And we're
All
going
right.
to see what we can come up with as to what would make a perfect first date, or what we can see would make a successful first date.
Right. Okay. So let's just make sure that I understand. So when we say that we've qualified superficially, that means the people have met before, and this is not sort of a blind first date off of Match.com or something.
You know, that's a good distinction. I think that nowadays, I mean, most of the women that I've dated recently have been from an online platform, whether it's Tinder, OkCupid, Match, whatever it is. But I also have a few people that I've met in person. I personally actually, it's not that I don't want to offend anybody that might be listening that has heard the show that I've dated before, but I've always had a different connection with girls that I've met, I guess, live. And the reason I always thought this way was because if I meet a girl somewhere, let's say I'm at like a lecture or something like that, and I'm interested in something and I meet a girl, I already know so much about her before even talking to her. I know how she looks. I know how she dresses. I can see if she's got friends with her. I can tell her character. Is she the kind of girl that sits in the front? Is she the kind of girl that sits in the back and chews gum and talks loud and doesn't really pay attention? I mean, everything I know about this girl, I couldn't have known. I couldn't have known without actually seeing her. And when I can come up and talk to her, she already knows a lot about me. Whereas online, everything that I learn about somebody is pre-planned.
Right. Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that, Dr. Lisle?
Well, the thing is that there's an elephant in the living room, and the elephant in the living room is if people have never met, the physical qualifying is an enormously tricky business. And it's a very good chance that somebody will not qualify, but nobody is going to give that away. In other words, most people are well-mannered enough that they're not going to signal that the other person didn't qualify. And so there's a great deal of qualification, essentially mystery that is going on a first date where the people have never met before. When the people have met before, then they've essentially already been through that. They've already pre-qualified each other as potentially or likely meeting minimal physical standards, and so this is really a different. We're at a different level now as we are going into the final two qualification problems, which are intelligence and personality. So, those are two different things, whether we've met people before or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems to be a completely different scenario when people have talked on the phone. Like, I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I matched with a girl on online dating platform, and how I like to do it is I typically like to talk to them on the phone a little bit, and I can tell right away if there's compatibility just from a conversation. And sometimes it just fizzles out and there's not really any hard feelings because I think both people can tell right away that there's some compatibility. Yeah. So what you're saying is that talking on the phone even before you meet each other physically, it can be a pretty good qualifying event as well.
Oh, it could be. Absolutely. I think that I have as we sort of move right into this, I have a little bit different strategy as a male. And that is that you have to understand that females don't even know this, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to rule you out. They're not trying to rule you in. And so they think they're trying to rule you in, but they're not trying to rule you in. They're trying to rule you out, particularly if they're hooked up with in the online world. So this is particularly true in the online world. And the reason why is the online world, people are meeting potential partners so much faster than they would in real life. Actually, not real life, in normal course of events. So a person, a reasonably attractive woman online, could be getting numerous emails a day, and she could be getting numerous emails from people that she finds somewhat interesting. And so the potential for her to meet people is huge, and she knows that this is true. And so as a result, she's actually, the cost-benefit for her of actually meeting any specific individual is pretty lousy. So she's not, it's likely to be a waste of time, because she's probably, her estimating systems are basically telling her that she can probably do better than whatever's in front of her. And so she's got what we're going to call a resume problem. And the resume problem is that if you're trying to hire for an important position and you get 100 resumes, it's very hard to take the third resume, no matter how good the person is. And that's because your brain tells you, well, wait a second, what are the odds that there isn't a better resume in this stack? And that's what's going on a lot with online dating. So from the standpoint of a male looking at this problem, I'm actually not trying to rule the females out on the phone. I'm trying to get in front of them. They're going to be a bit problematic to get in front of them a lot of times. The ones that are at the upper reaches of your mate value, which are the only ones that you're really interested in terms of pair bond strategy, are going to be relatively difficult for a male to get to. So I wouldn't fall into the trap of trying to save your own time and energy by trying to rule them out first. I would say, in general, get in front of them. And the reason is, even though I would agree with you that the phone is useful and the phone is a way for you to tell quite a bit about them, the problem is that it's a narrow snapshot of what a person is like. and you are looking at some degree of distortion when you just hear a voice. And so, and particularly a voice under those kind of difficult circumstances. So it's likely that you will fall into the following situation. Females are designed to be very protective of their sexuality and their time and energy around this process. And remember, she's looking at a whole bunch of competitors, and she's decided that she was just interested enough in you to really seriously consider meeting you, but we'll just talk on the phone, for example, first. In other words, she wants one more shot to rule you out before she goes to the trouble of meeting you. Now, she doesn't know this, but she's actually trying to rule you out. She doesn't really know this consciously. She thinks she's just having an open mind and making sure it's not a disaster. But the truth is, she's actually trying to find reasons to rule you out. And the problem is that in a conversation where she's actually trying to rule you out, she may very quickly rule you out. And when she does that, then she sends signals to you that she's ruling you out, which irritate you. Okay? And then as a male, you haven't come close to ruling her out yet. You've actually ruled her in for casual mating strategy, or you wouldn't have written to her in the first place. And so as a result, you're pretty interested, and you are hoping to meet her, and you're hoping everything just clicks and it's all going to be wonderful. But the truth is, when that conversation starts, that conversation can turn unpleasant or mildly unpleasant pretty quickly on the basis of the female ruling out agenda. And when that happens, the male can quickly turn, and he doesn't even know why it happened. But he's a little irritable, she's a little irritable, and it's all like, hey, well, I guess we don't have that much in common, see you later. And that could easily have been a mistake. The truth of the matter is that had that female met the male, it's very possible that meeting him with 5 senses instead of 1 would have changed her thinking, and it would have been more difficult to rule that guy out. And in fact, your agenda on date one as a male, who, when you are dating somebody who is in principle at the upper reaches of your ability to land them, i.e. a pair bond strategy female, your agenda is to just get date two. Your agenda isn't anything else. And so, of course, you're trying to learn about her, and we'll talk about that as we go today, because that's an important part of how it is that you're going to get date two. But your number one agenda is to not get ruled out. That's the point. And so, so I would be reticent to use the telephone, and in fact, in general, I would avoid it. Telephone is fine after you know the person. That's a perfectly great tool, obviously. But before you meet the person, I think unless you're going to drive quite a ways and you're trying to decide whether or not it's worth driving 70 miles to meet somebody, if it's not that big of a drive and you've got a fish biting on the line, I would avoid the phone and try to just close for a meet. I think that's a much better strategy.
Now, the number one fear of women on online dating is that they connect with somebody who's a serial killer. I don't know if this is true. I had read this in a couple of different articles. I didn't actually go fish in this. I didn't go fish out the study, but I've heard girls tell me that before as well. So how do we go from the messages online to the meetup without a girl thinking that this is just too much and that she's nervous?
Well, depends. It depends if she wants to talk on the phone, great. Then we have to have a whole new strategy for how it is that we're going to talk on the phone. And when you're going to talk on the phone, then you need to, again, be planning to not get ruled out. That is the job on the phone. The job is not to get ruled in. The female thinks that she's trying to rule you in, but she's not. She's trying to rule you out. She actually wants to get rid of you. She wants to get rid of you so she can go back to her resume stack and look for something that doesn't have any reservations in it. She's contacted you, or she's been willing to contact you, but it's with reservations. Okay, so it seems like you're 8 out of 10 on her highest values chart, or 7 out of 10. So pretty good, pretty interested, not falling all over herself. She has fallen all over herself in her life before and been weak in the knees behind people that blew her out of the water. And some of those people flirted with her and may have even taken a role with her behind casual mating strategy agendas. And she was in love, and she knows what that feels like, and she wants to have that again. And for some reason, he just had commitment problems and couldn't commit. Okay. So the point is that she's looking to watch that lightning strike, see it happen again, because it's happened before, in all probability. So as a result, she doesn't know this, but that's never going to happen in a pair bond strategy situation for her, or it's exceedingly unlikely that that's going to happen. But she doesn't know this because she's naive about her own psychology. So as a result, she is not that crazy about meeting you. She's interested, but she is not weak in the knees, and she is, and so she's actually trying to get back to her resume stack, get rid of the cognitive dissonance that you're causing because you're pretty interesting, but she's got a feeling that if she goes through 50 more resumes, she's going to find something better. Okay, so as a result, if she wants to talk on the phone, she may think that she wants to talk on the phone in order to reduce her anxiety about meeting a serial killer. Depends upon who you are and what your circumstances are. But you can, my strategy over the last 15, 18 years of this has been to tell them who I am. No problem. If I let people know who I am, literally first and last name, these people can look you up on the internet. They can see that you're also fearless about giving them your name. They can see where you live, and the point is, it all starts to make sense. And you are not hiding from the law. You're not hiding from a wife. If you were to, they can, for example, for $1, if they're that anxious, they can scan you on People Finder or whatever and find out if you're married and what your address is and how old you are and everything else under the sun. And so
might be a little too anxious for me, though.
What's that?
So that might be a little too anxious for me, but
for you to do this?
For me to no. That might demonstrate to me that the woman is too anxious if she has to go through all that.
Right. Well, actually, she might quietly do that. She probably won't. But let's for example, let's suppose that at some point
about
in this,
about the background check. Yeah, I mean about the people finder background check. They're Googling the name. That happens plenty.
Yeah. Right. You know what? Depends upon the female. Like, for example, I worked in criminal justice for many years, and there's a lot of women working in criminal justice. And as a result, believe me, the women in criminal justice are very interested in checking backgrounds. And so so if you give them access to that, let them frisk you freely, then they're more comfortable. Okay, so anyway, my point is if you're willing to give them your name, you are showing an openness and a complete and utter lack of guile in this situation that is essentially saying I have nothing to hide, and et cetera. So that would be one way. I'd rather do that than talk on the phone. These are, I would prefer to avoid the telephone, and I've avoided the telephone probably 95% of all online dates that I've gone on, for the very reason that I'm describing to you, because the phone is just one more method for them to figure out how to rule you out before they've ever met you. So keep that in mind as just a strategy, concept. And
this
you
is
can
great.
Watch it, yeah.
I would say this is great. It makes a lot of sense.
Yes. It is important to know that this is that the female is really facing an enormous resume problem, and it's really got her head in a knot. That she absolutely wants to be swept off her feet behind what I refer to as weak knees delta. And the delta in mathematics, or the difference between her gene quality and the man's gene quality, if there is a sufficient difference between the two where she is looking up the genetic ladder at him, then she feels weak in the knees. And I've termed that weak knees delta. And every woman just about has experienced weak knees delta. And so some of them have experienced it within the context of a, quote, relationship of some kind that lasted for some length, probably short. And they are thinking that is what true love is, and that's what they're looking for, and by God, they don't want to settle for anything less. And so we are fighting. If you are a pair bond strategy male, you are fighting weak knees delta. And the female's agenda there, and you are fighting the resume problem that she's got in front of her, and so our agenda is to not get ruled out, getting to the first date, not getting ruled out at the first date, not getting ruled out at the second date. If you can get to date 3, then you're safe. Okay, you will now have gotten a full hearing, and you will get to be able to really learn about who this person is, what they're like, how much you like them, etc. But it's going to take about that much time for you to get a fair shake, at least 3. Okay, that's it's going to turn out that the research done many years ago, Robert Zients, then at the University of Michigan, did studies that became famous in the field of psychology and led to him receiving psychologists' highest honor, which is for distinguished scientific contribution to the field. They only give it to like a couple of people a year. And Zients won his famous award for work in what we call the repeat exposure effect. And so they probably gave it to him for a bunch of other things too. He's a very prolific researcher. But the repeat exposure effect was probably the most famous work that Zients ever did. And what it was is it shows that that as people get exposed to stimuli, they like the stimuli better. And so the repeat exposure increases the liking. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen for everything. So you got some jerk boss. The more you know the boss, the less you like them. Of course, that's possible. But in general, it's going to be true that the more you are exposed to stimuli, the better you like the stimuli. The reasons for this are numerous, but deep biological reasons are that they are more safe. Because if you have not had some traumatic, weird reaction to the situation when you were first exposed to it, then you had a second exposure that was safe, and then a third exposure that was safe, you are now determining that this is a safe stimuli. And so obviously women have potentially much greater danger in meeting novel men than men have in meeting novel women. So this is going to be much to this is going to be, I'm describing much more female psychology from this standpoint than male psychology. So male psychology, males will not typically increase their physical attraction to females over time, but they can increase their liking to the person over time. Certainly that's a normal phenomenon along really friendship lines, not so much romance lines, but friendship lines definitely. Whereas the female is absolutely likely to find the male more appealing over time. And very often, a male that did not qualify on date 1 will qualify on date 6. Okay? Because effectively, this is actually the deep biological reasons why this is true. Because the male is a source of protection and provision for females in this species for reproductive purposes, and the opposite is not true. The female is not a source of protection and provision for the male. As a result of this, the female's mate value is much more exposed just by vision. The male's mate value is not as much exposed by vision. So therefore, it's simply a proportion of variance that's involved here about what proportion of the individual's mate value is exposed by visual inspection. And the answer of the female is a great deal of it is exposed by visual inspection. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Okay. Whereas for the male, a lot of it is also exposed by visual inspection, but not as much. Okay. So as a result, the male needs to be under further inspection by the female. The female has to, at a Stone Age primal level, she is already signaling to the male that she's interested, or she would not have met up with him. So she's already essentially signaled sexual interest is in a matter of sorts. That's the reason she's there. She's already admitted that she is sexually free of other relationships and that she is seeking a sexual relationship. That is what she's doing by going out on a date and agreeing to it. Okay? Now she meets the male. She has to worry immediately that the signals that she has sent has indicated to the male that he qualifies, and now she's going to be fending off a sexual advance. Okay? So as a result of this, of course her defenses are up. Of course she's concerned about it, and of course she wants to get rid of the problem before it ever starts, which is why she'd like to rule you out unless you can talk like Cyrano de Bergerac, on the phone. She may not be interested. Okay? And if she finds a way to rule it out and wait for that electric moment where she gets a weak knees delta email from somebody who just looks like she can't, making her offer she can't refuse. So our job along this pathway as a male is to not get ruled out, which means we are respectful, we are gentlemanly, and we are pleasant, and we are not pushy. And so if there's a phone conversation, I would keep the phone conversations very perfunctory. And I would, this is what I call the octopus strategy. We do not let them know that much about us. We may let them know our name and let them know what we do for a living, but we're not going to tell them that we like to have tea at 4 o'clock and that we have a cat that we'd like and that we like to snowmobile. Anything that you say like that, she's going to think, oh, I hate the snow. No, this is not going to work. Done. Okay? This enables her to not have to deal with this problem, and she gets back to her resume stack. Okay? So we do not want her to be able to do that. So we completely cloud the water up. So we do not actually tell her hardly anything about ourselves except who we are, kind of what we do. And we ask her some questions about herself. And then within a few minutes, 12 minutes, 15, no more on the phone than that. We have actually, if you're smart about this, you essentially quasi-script this so that you are very quickly going down, asking her questions and following up commentary pleasantly on things that are already in her online profile, okay? So she's already told them to the world, and we say, ooh and ah, oh, that's really cool, and we don't say too much about ourselves, and then we say, oh, gee, you just sound like just this wonderful person. I really hope we can meet. How about such and such? So we close pretty early, so we don't. We put that female dissonance into a place where there's really no reason to rule us out, and there's really it would be essentially unfriendly to reject us at that point, and we close for it. Done. Now we're on safe ground. Now they can still kill it off at the last second if weak knees Delta email comes in, but they probably won't. You don't set dates for a long time in advance. Trust me. Weak knees Delta email is going to come in. She's going to see somebody that's too good, can't refuse. So we're closing these things pretty quickly, no more than a week and a half in advance.
And so, what do you do in the middle of that? You set the date. Now there's 7 days or 5 days or 10 days in between. Do you just not message them? Do you not call them? Do you not text them?
No, I would probably. If there's been a phone thing, and I would say, oh, it would be okay if I text you kind of where I'm thinking we should go, okay? And we do that on the phone, and they say, oh, sure, okay, because they've already given you the phone number. And so now what we do is 3 days from then, we text, and we say, hey, this is where we're going, and here's the reservation, and we're all set. Really look forward to seeing you. Be great to see you. Okay, now they got a problem. Okay, so now we're only 3 or 4 days away from the date, and it's going to be a little harder for them to squiggle out. And you've made a reservation, and clearly, et cetera. Trust me, in the time you hung up the phone to the time that email sent, they've been scheming about how to get out of it. You have to understand that these are energy conservation egg guarding machines. That's what a female is. She's designed by nature to guard the eggs. She has to. The males are serial killer. Serial killer is really not what they're worried about. They're really worried about being raped. Okay, they're worried about. They're fundamentally worried. They're really mostly worried about just this hassle of putting up with some potential stalking nutcase that meets them and is all gaga about them, and then they're going to be turned into a big hassle, i.e., a big egg guarding fiasco. And so and behind that ultimately is rape in whatever form it is that you would want to call it. Essentially sexual pushiness, just the whole forcible process that could go on there in any number of ways. Any male is a potential threat to a female to push her into a situation where she's having unwanted sexual activity. Okay, and that female knows that she has signal interest in this male, and therefore she's a little bit vulnerable and a little bit culpable. Okay, so she's trying to get out of it, and we don't want to let her out of it. We want to meet her. We want to find out whether she's 10% fancier than we are, and that we're happy about it and excited about it, and we want to show her the rest of us, which is the part that she needs time to assess. And we want the repeat exposure effect ultimately working for us so that we can qualify. That's the whole idea.
Fantastic. Okay, so now we move on. We've secured the date. We may or may not have had a phone conversation. We will have messaged her or texted her the location and in a couple of days, and so now we get to the first date. And I've heard you mention before that dinner is usually a good first date, or lunch, or some sort of meal where we talked about this maybe a few episodes down, how much to spend on the first date. So listen in on that if you're curious about that. But let's say you're at the venue now. How do we make sure that as men we have a successful first date?
Yeah, obviously, first thing that just to reiterate from the previous episode, we don't try to cheap it out. Absolutely not. You do not cheap it out. This is there's no reason to play the game that way. The total dollars that you will save in this lifetime by chiseling females on dates will add up to nothing compared to how important it is to try to land the right one. So we don't try to chisel these people. We go to a nice place, and we're not talking about Michelin rated restaurants, not unless we're a Michelin rated human that makes a couple of $100,000 a year or more, and we're trying to signal that to a female who's pretty fancy. Okay, so if that's true, maybe you'll wind up at a Michelin rated restaurant. But in general, where we're trying to go is nice, pleasant, good. Okay, that's what we want to do. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to the nature of the conversation is going to be yes, go ahead.
Let me just interrupt there. Apologies.
Yeah. Sure.
Basically, what you're saying is, feeling cheap about a girl. What men should really do is find a girl that they feel compelled to not be cheap with.
Yeah, it means that in the online world, because you haven't met the person before, you're going to get burned plenty. Okay, you're going to meet a lot of people that have over-advertised, and it turns out that they don't qualify for you. If you're a male, they don't qualify for you, and you are stuck now at a nice place, spending some money on a nice dinner. You got to look at this as practice. Okay, this is the great salesperson Tom Hopkins. He wrote a book, How to Master the Art of Selling. He had a phrase to help salespeople maintain their essentially their composure and their attitude when they were experiencing a lot of failure. And he says, "I never see failure as failure. I see it as an opportunity to practice my techniques and perfect my performance." And that is how a guy ought to feel when he's with a female who does not qualify. Decent gal, obviously she had characteristics that look pretty solid to him, or he wouldn't have been interested. He's in front of her now. He's at a nice place. You're going to spend the money anyway. You might as well use it as an opportunity to perfect your techniques and perfect your performance. Practice your techniques, perfect your performance, and essentially do a good job at managing a conversation with someone new. And some people are very good at this. Most people are not very good at it. And there's reasons why it is that we should use these situations as practice. But from this point, we do not want to cheap it out. We have the person now socially cornered for an hour and a half, or an hour to an hour and a half. And now our job is to get good at this process, because one day we're going to need it. Okay? One day you're going to meet somebody that you're very interested in that is iffy about you because it's date number one and you don't really qualify. You don't qualify yet, and you are going to need those conversational skills and social skills in order to get date two, and then you got a shot. And that's what we're after.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've qualified. We're at the date. We're not going to cheap it out. What are some,
right,
next steps? Let's continue on with what you were saying.
The female is qualified. The female is qualified. Okay?
Correct. Yeah. Before I interrupted you.
We don't know. Yes. So the female has qualified. So we're pretty damn excited. Okay. If the female qualifies, the male is now, his insides are lighting up because he wants to win. And so at this point, what we need to do is quite a few things. Number one, it is human nature that when you to only be excited if you feel over rewarded, and the whole point is you're trying to find a situation where you do feel over rewarded. So if you do get a situation where you're feeling over rewarded, you are pretty excited. However, it's also true that the people on the other side of this are designed by nature to be reading these cues. And if you seem too excited, then they feel like, wait a second, I must be too good for you. Okay? So we don't want to be falling all over ourselves, even if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where you are falling all over yourself. So what we want to do is we want to be very cool and have a script. And the script that we're going to have is going to be that we are going to be looking to ask that woman questions about herself and her life, because we want to draw her out. And the reason we want to draw her out is that she actually wants very much to be valued for her insides, and that's something that a lot of men won't spend the time to do. They're selling too hard. They're too anxious. They're trying to essentially beat down her egg defenses and get to the eggs by salesmanship, by selling what it is that they have to offer, instead of essentially turning the table slightly and acting like the buyer. And we do that by asking questions and signaling interest in what it is that they have to say. And that is the chief technique that we are going to employ in order to get to date 2.
What are some of your favorite, maybe top 3 questions that you think are valuable to ask?
You know, I don't even think of it that way. Let me tell you why.
It's okay. I wouldn't want to tell my competitors either.
Yeah. No, I actually have to just tell you that I'm a clinical psychologist. So as a clinical psychologist for 3 decades, what I do is I ask people questions. And so when a person comes into a room, no matter who they are, when they sit down, they're anxious. They're a little anxious about talking to the psychologist. And so my job is to put them at ease, and it's pretty easy for me to do that. So the questions, sometimes I might have to, if I could see that they're so anxious that they're actually going to have trouble talking and saying anything, then I might say a few things myself. Okay, so I might wander off and tell a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to work my way back and ask them questions. So I obviously you aren't starting from scratch. You know something about the person. In people's profiles online, they will tell you quite a bit, and so you should go into that date having a pretty good map in your head about who this person is, and anything that you don't know that you are a little confused about, you should have those as questions that you're going to be asking them, so that you know what's going on. So that you know where you're going. Okay, and your there's a few things that are worth knowing, and that is that remember that prosecutors are not allowed to make statements. All they do is ask questions, and prosecutors are trained to ask questions to keep control of this process. And so it's the person that is asking the questions that is in control. And so if you know that that's where you need to turn to, and then there are, of course, if you wanted to do this, you could make a taxonomy of all the kinds of questions you could ask people. But the things that people are interested in is they're interested in their careers, they're interested in how it is that they came to be, where they are, where they went to school, what they studied, their family, what they like to do on weekends, what music do they like, do they like to do things outdoors, where have they traveled, what have they seen, what are some of the places that they've never been, okay? If they had to choose, their 7 favorite meals, or there's 7 meals they had 1 week and they could eat anything. What would be 7 of their favorite meals that they would eat? Okay, so we could go on and on about questions that we could ask people. But these
You're
are
making me hungry now.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Now another very useful thing to know is that it would be good to have to be thinking about stories that that you could tell that they are going to ask you similar questions. And so if you want to be very effective at this, if you want to be particularly effective, if you are a little bit shy or you don't have a lot of naturally great social skill, then you can get very good very fast with some planning and a little bit of effort. So what you would do is you would realize that women are going to ask you same stereotypic 20, 25 questions that are the basis of most human conversation. And so in those questions and in your explanations of your life history, you can embed a couple of stories that are entertaining and self-effacing. Okay, so self-effacing humor is a very, very endearing characteristic of humans. It essentially tells the person on the other side that you are not desperate for status and that you are not essentially trying to defend. You are willing to show foibles, Achilles heels, etc. And if you tell a couple stories like this, they can relax the person on the other side of the table because they can see that they're with somebody that is not like desperately defending every bit of status and playing the game extremely carefully. So that's something you can think about. You can think about this life. Think about any time I have anything really embarrassing happen to me, I file it away in my memory as something that I might tell either in front of an audience someday or in front of a woman on a date, because if that way I made something out of that situation, and in history and retrospect, it's always very entertaining. It may not be entertaining at the time, but it's entertaining later, 2 years later or a year later or 10 years later.
Yeah, I remember listening to one of your talks that I watched on your website, esteemdynamics.org, and you mentioned how your father there was a guy, Jeff Novick, that he listened to his lecture, and he said, Doug, your lecture was good, but Jeff Novick's, it was really great.
Yeah, actually he said, Doug, you're okay, but Jeff Novick is really good. Yeah, and that's a true story. And so if I'm talking about if I'm talking about my family and one of the things I do for a living, and if I would say yes, I'm a speaker. I said not that this is all that impressive, at least not to my family, and then I could tell that story. And so just like that, we are. This is a prince of all thumbs. Like we are explaining something positive about us, but at the same time we're showing that we're a little clumsy, despite even in context of any achievement. Okay, so this notion of self-effacing humor, very powerful, very useful strategy.
It's very, very interesting because a couple of podcasts ago we did the psychology of humor, and on that same topic of me watching some of the videos that you did, no matter how many times I watch those videos and I hear that joke, it always makes me laugh. And it just shows me how this is kind of ingrained in our nervous system.
Right.
Even though I know the punchline.
You sort of like to see me lose status, so it tickles your nervous system particularly. Right. No, that's very true, and that's how a comedian knows and learns that a joke is really good, because when time after time people still laugh at it, and across people and even multiple times, they know they've really hit a circuit really well, and the circuits are, it's a thing of beauty when you do that, and it's a thing of endearment when you do it, and you are the one losing the faux status. That is one of the most effective things you will see in surveys on what females find attractive in men. Once away from the physical characteristics, when we're talking about psychological characteristics, one of the most important things that they mention is a sense of humor. Okay, and that sense of humor some women that are a little more disagreeable and tough would like it if we're making fun of other people and sort of a biting sense of humor. But if that's you and then that's your chick, then have at it. Most women are not that tough. Most women are in that situation. They are slightly insecure themselves to some degree, and the situation is a little anxiety provoking, and they're not sure where any of this is going. But if we tell a story in context that is self-effacing, big time relaxation. Okay, now they can relax, and that kind of humor signals one of the most important characteristics that women are seeking. They think they're seeking sense of humor, which is partially true, but they are also seeking kindness. Okay, they are seeking kindness, and they are seeking emotional stability. Those are very important characteristics. They can read right through a self-effacing story, and what this tells them is that this is not a narcissistic, edgy human that is going to argue and want their way and always have to be right and everything else under the sun. Okay, a self-effacing humor moment really tells that female in genetic code, tells her this is a person that is pleasant and can be, the conflicts of interest do not have to be catastrophic. They can lose status, and all the wheels don't come off. This is a very important characteristic that women are seeking in long-term relationships.
Very cool. That I was giving a talk recently at a group, and I was, after this was a couple of weeks after the Psychology of Humor podcast, and it was just so interesting because I had never tried this before, but I was up there talking about my topic, and I threw in 2 self-effacing jokes just about me losing status in a situation. And I'd never gotten such a good audience response before. It was fantastic. So
there you go.
It was great.
There you go. Yeah.
So you're saying,
I'm so happy. I'm so happy because now, in other words, you learned this concept, you did it, and it worked beautifully, and now you know. Once you've had that happen to you, that's like a drug. You realize, that's an important key to human nature, is to be able to stoke that. It's a wonderful signal. I learned this. I was as a young man a long time ago. I know it's hard for you to believe, Nate, but I used to be a young man.
There it is again.
There it is. But as a young man, I was at UC San Diego and as an undergraduate, and intelligently I had quit physics because I took one look at physics and realized not only is it hard, there's no women in physics, and if there are women in physics, they look a lot like the men. You can't tell the difference. So anyway, the point is, beautiful. It was time to leave. So I went to the psychology department, which was way higher proportion of females. And so what I, of course, was trying to signal to the females, being a nerdy sort, was that I was trying to signal my great intelligence, of course. And so my very first upper division class was a social psychology class, ironically enough, taught by a young professor out of Harvard by the name of James Kulik. Kulik was, really fine young prof, and but he was a nice guy, and so I would have like biting criticism and really intelligent questions and hard questions, and I was just showing off for all I was worth. And one day, and this is about 3 or 4 weeks in, and one day I came into the midterm, and this young professor, it was his very first teaching. It was his first quarter teaching as a professor. He had just graduated a few months before out of Harvard. And so he's up there and he says, okay, well, here's a question that would be on the midterm. And he starts to read it, and I could tell immediately that it was a pretty hard question. And I knew the answer to it, but I also knew that I didn't think the rest of the class, most of them, would know the answer to it. And I could immediately sense an anxiety and rumbling in the class. And at that moment, I took a chance. and I said, for extra credit, okay? And the entire place cracked up. It was just this moment. I just hit it. I knew I took a chance. And everybody busted up, and that was the moment that I found my drug. That was it. And I realized that is going to be the key. And from that point on, I became the class clown. Not in a ridiculous way, but I was always mouthing off whenever something occurred to me that was funny. And I believe me, I have not had many victories, but a very attractive girl in that class made it clear she was interested, and which flabbergasted me. And we'll tell our audience clearly, I had no idea what I was going to do about it and managed to do nothing. So I was too anxious and deer in the headlights about it. But the point is that I learned there is an angle, there is something, or there is a lever that helps our ability to compete with other males, is the sense of humor, and that could be a very important reason why we even have such a thing, Nate. Mm-hmm. It may have evolved very elegantly to help males compete for mates.
Now, what do you say about the type of female or the personality characteristics of a female who, when you do self-effacing humor in front of her, she goes, "Oh no, like take credit, don't knock yourself down."
Well, then the self-effacing humor was a little too ham-handed, and it wasn't. It didn't come quite from a position of strength enough, so it wasn't done quite right. Now, I have to tell you, I have had. Our listeners will not have known my history, so they don't know that in the vegetarian world, I'm a well-known speaker, and that my shtick is my poor artistic skills, and so this is a whole shtick that goes on, that's been going on for 20 years, and of course people love the shtick, but one of the things that will happen on occasion is about 4 or 5 times a year, somebody will come up to me and say, "No, you should really work on your art. Don't let your dad dissuade you."
They take it seriously.
I mean, just for our listeners, my art is meant by design. I have zero skill. It is very clear that my artistic skills are at the level of a low-grade 4-year-old, and this actually is the art that I use in all of my slides, and it is meant to be entertaining as a constant recurrent motif in order to delight an audience that this guy may think he knows something about psychology, but he clearly is an idiot in the art world. And that is a very pleasant experience for audiences to have, by the way. And sure enough, once in a while, some sweet dingbat thinks that, doesn't understand that this is a joke. And so I'm sure, so it tells me that, the human ability to misunderstand knows almost no bounds, but done reasonably well, you shouldn't be missing. Okay? If you are missing, and there's yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, if somebody does miss it, then you just roll your eyeballs and realize that this girl's not smart enough for you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard you lecture, and you had your bit about your father didn't give you the proper encouragement, and I thought, God, what is this guy? What is it with psychologists? They're always talking about their personal problems.
Right.
And then the second time I heard it, I thought, oh no, this is a joke.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
No worries. So anyway, the story is, just to sort of encapsulate, our story is, from the male's perspective, is that whether you know it or not, you're not being treated like a prospect, you're being treated as a suspect. And they are suspecting that you're a waste of time, and that they're suspecting that they're really not going to be that interested. They've been disappointed a whole bunch of times, and they've had to defend their eggs against casual mating strategy, and that's not what they want. And so they're hoping that you're telling the truth, and they're hoping that somehow there might be some spark, et cetera, but they don't think so. And so as a result, you're fighting some battles here that really they're trying to defend the eggs and not even meet you. So our job is to essentially take this thing 1 inch at a time. And we take it by being gentlemanly, respectfully, essentially signal all the way that we are a stable, responsible pair bond material. Not a doormat, pleasant. If they pull back, we don't get upset. Let it go. Doesn't matter how. Essentially. Oh, I was going to say also, at that first meeting, if you are excited, that's all the more reason we stick to the script. We ask them questions about themselves, and we go through the process. We do our self-effacing humor. We don't fall all over ourselves trying to sell, because if you do that, they're going to read it. They're designed by nature to read it. And they're designed by nature to run from somebody that acts like they're being too heavily over-rewarded at a first meet. So our job is to maintain your cool, maintain your poise, follow this conservative, responsible, pleasant strategy, and where we were signaling to them that they need to tell us their inner beauty and that we're interested. Because until they tell us that inner beauty, we're not sold. Okay? That is the subtext. When we are asking them questions about themselves, the subtext is, I'm interested, but I'm not blown away. I'm not thinking about marrying you just because I find you so attractive. No, I'd like to learn more about you. Tell me more. And that's a profound signal of strength that a male would like to show in that situation. And so that's the key strategy towards getting and executing properly date number 1.
Fantastic. Love it. So next week we're going to be back and we're going to be talking about keys to a successful first date from a woman's perspective.
Okay. That could be a little more difficult, but I'll be thinking about it.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll do it over a course of what do you think? 37 episodes? Will that cover just the first 10 minutes?
Yeah. We'll get to it. I'm sure I got plenty to say about this. In fact, I do.